Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic solved Security Breach's most mysterious character, a character that seemed to completely confuse the fandom and one that was also even overlooked by fans, the Blob, who is also known as Tangle. Now I know that's a bold claim, especially since Secret of the Mimic seemed to answer mysteries that were more connected to the earlier parts of the timeline, like who created what animatronics and how the Mimic fits with games like FNAF 4 or Sister Location. But I think we can use clues from this game, or rather tragedies, to tell us the true identity of Security Breach's most complicated and intriguing character. In a case where this game's story was essentially split into two different versions, what if FNAF Secret of the Mimic is now the key to having one final answer to who the Blob really is? And if this animatronic is possessed by the spirits or agony of different people? Well, my name is Bronze Films, and let's solve who is possessing the Blob, how many souls are possessing this animatronic, and how the Pizzaplex is the center of this new theory. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and I really do appreciate all the support on the channel. Before we can begin to tackle the amalgamation that is Tangle, it's important to first understand the technicians from Secret of the Mimic. Throughout the main gameplay, we play as Arnold, a technician hired by Fazbear's Entertainment to retrieve the schematics to the Mimic endoskeleton. In one of the endings, Arnold inserts the data driver into the Mimic and fixes its programming, where we can then assume he is able to escape MCM. But in two other endings, Arnold is killed and stopped by the Mimic, as the Mimic flips his work van over or stuffs him into one of the prototype animatronic suits. Arnold fails to retrieve the schematics and isn't actually the only one to do so, or wasn't the only technician sent by Fazbear's. In Murray's costume manor, you can find other technicians that were sent by Fazbear's and also ultimately failed to retrieve the Mimic schematics. Outside of the manor, you can even find an abandoned work van that is run down and destroyed. We can assume it belonged to one of the other teams that were sent to MCM, and this van serves as a small clue to their disappearances and murders. Not only do we know that these victims were a part of Team 12, but we can also find their actual bodies stuffed inside of mascot suits by the Mimic. Through the text logs, we can even find 3 messages that came from 3 of those technicians that show us exactly where they were killed and what suits they were stuffed inside of. With the first message, it reads,
I hope this message reaches someone. There's something outside. I have no idea what it wants. But I can still hear Thompson's screams. I didn't sign up for this.
We find this text log in the back rooms of the welcome lobby, and right next to the mailbox we find a body inside of a jester costume with only their right arm and leg sticking outside of the suit. This message was most likely their final thoughts before being attacked by the Mimic, and Thompson was also most likely a part of Team 12, and can be any of the other bodies we find. But with the second message, it reads,
I'm almost there. I can see the last permission upgrade. I'm going to get that Christmas bonus, even if it kills me.
So checking a locker near this mailbox and behind the executive permissions machine, you'll find the body of a technician who left this message. Here he is wearing a Swing Bee mascot head, and he was chasing a similar bonus to the one Arnold was offered for retrieving the schematics.
You can't fool me though, you're just trying to snag one of those $25 gift certificates at the end of the year for outstanding performance.
He obviously fails and is one of the secret jump scares of this game, but with the final text log we can actually pinpoint exactly where and what happened to this technician.
I stopped the show. Whew. I don't think there's another way in, so I should be safe for now. There's a maniac in a costume chasing me, like something out of a drive-in movie. No one is ever going to believe me. Just one guy or a whole group of psychos?
This is of course the same welcome show Arnold faces at the beginning of the game, and the Mimic jumping from suit to suit is also something Arnold faces. But above the welcome show you can find yet another body of a technician hanging from the ceiling in a jester mascot suit with their left arm and leg hanging out. Among these 3 bodies we can also find a body inside of a dog mascot suit in the power room, a body stuffed inside of a hedgehog suit in the theater's audience holding a gift box, and 2 bodies that are hidden out of the player's view. One is crushed underneath a shelf with their arm popping out, and the other body is stuffed under a pile of different mascot suits, which brings the total number of dead technicians from Team 12 to 7. So 7 dead bodies that are left in MCM, but how does any of it connect to the Blob? In FNAF Security Breach, Gregory goes to the lowest point in the Pizzaplex, which was revealed to be the location from FNAF 6. There he finds a sinkhole that goes to an even lower level where he finds the Blob, an amalgamation of animatronic parts, wires, and parts of characters we're all familiar with. The Blob tries to stop Gregory, but he is able to burn trap alongside the Blob and is able to escape the Pizzaplex with Glaremock Freddy. Blob then reappears in a small cameo near the beginning of the Ruin DLC, where it can be seen inside of a hole in the wall before it quickly backs away and becomes out of view, as it will then disappear for the rest rest of the game. Down in the sinkhole, you can also find a trail of oil left behind from the blob, as the trail leads to this hole in the wall. This can tell us that the blob is within the Pizzaplex's walls and structure, meaning it's most likely the reason the Pizzaplex collapsed against itself was because the blob would hollow out the foundation with massive tunnels, not because of an earthquake like newspapers suggested. But what is this amalgamation of different animatronics? Well, it includes the FNAF 1 versions of Chica and Bonnie, it includes the puppet, Circus Baby, parts of Mangle, and at the head of it all is Funtime Freddy. Now, by no means are these the original animatronics from the past restaurants, especially since animatronics like the puppet were burned down in the FNAF 6 ending, and others like Funtime Freddy would become Molten Freddy. But now we have two very different topics that come from two very different time periods in the franchise, so the key to connect them is the Pizzaplex, and more specifically how the manor where Secret of the Mimic takes place is under the Pizzaplex, and you can watch this whole video where I explain how. I go over red bricks, pipes found in both MCM and in the sinkhole, and these 1970s style TVs that are found in the Pizzaplex that could have only come from this time period and from MCM. In that video, I actually go over how most locations are connected by one single forest, so make sure to go check that out here. So if these two areas are one and the same, I'm proposing that the souls or agony of the 7 technicians murdered by the Mimic and left in MCM would possess the amalgamation of animatronics, which would then be known as Tangle, where each technician would possess a body or head, and their eyes would even still be lit up, signifying their presence. Now I know that may seem far-stretched, so to attempt to convince you that it's all true, it's important to first understand that MCM or the Pizzaplex is haunted. I'm sure that most of you know the theory that MCM is haunted by the spirit of David, Edwin's deceased son who presumably possesses the White Tiger mascot. As we can hear his laughter, he'll randomly appear in front of us, and it's a character clearly similar to Golden Freddy. But I believe it's also haunted by the spirits of the dead technicians. Not only do boxes randomly jump at you and the music from the cardboard cutouts start playing as if someone's trying to get your attention, but as another theorist, Logan Entertainment, pointed out in his own video about the blob, when you first encounter the Mimic in the elephant suit near the crate where he escapes from, you can find an incomplete head of an elephant suit. Taking a closer look at the head, there appears to be a small light source, and on rare occasions, the light source within the head glows very bright and clearly looks possessed. We can even compare this mask to the bad ending of FNAF 3, where we see the main animatronics alongside Golden Freddy having their mascot heads lit up by a bright light source, meaning they are still possessed. So what if this light source came from one of the dead technicians trying to possess the elephant head or trying to get Arnold's attention? And to me, all this proves that their souls are still somewhere around MCM, which would eventually become the Pizzaplex. Although decades passed between these two time frames, this doesn't mean that these spirits, and vengeful spirits at that, would just disappear or be put to rest. Why wouldn't they possess an animatronic, an amalgamation in the depths of the Pizzaplex where their deaths all occurred? Earlier I mentioned how there were a total of 7 dead technicians, and there just happens to be a total of 7 animatronics in the blob, a perfect amount of souls for each character. Because the blob is technically in MCM, I think we can even go as far to say that all of the wires, mechanical parts, and animatronic heads all came from the manor and from this time period. When looking at all of these wires and heads, they look really old. They don't just look destroyed or withered, but they appear to be decades old. This was a detail that always stood out to me, since well-known theories suggest that the blob is made up of animatronics from the special delivery service, but those animatronics would almost be completely new and wouldn't necessarily look like this. Now I know that would have a lot of lore implications, but we already saw prototype versions of Bonnie and Chica in the basement of MCM, and it could even be the exact animatronics we're seeing returning once again in the blob. We also know Edwin was working on puppet prototypes for Fazbear's, so the puppet mask without the tears we see here could be one of those prototypes, something abandoned by Edwin but returning here. But with other characters like Mangle, Funtime Freddy, and Circus Baby, it's harder to prove how they would have come from MCM. But we do also know Edwin was working on alternate Fazbear's designs, which could have included early versions of Mangle or the Funtime animatronics. But there's no real way of knowing this, so saying that all the animatronics come from MCM and from 1979 it does have less evidence. But regardless, I still think it's worth considering when trying to solve where these parts came from. But in my last theory video, I covered how Glamrock Freddy might be possessed by Arnold, the protagonist of Secret of the Mimic. You can watch the full video here explaining how that would even be remotely possible, but for the sake of the argument, saying it's true here, voice lines from Glamrock Freddy might also support this claim.
I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I did not want to, but I had no choice. Now I have a choice. I have changed. My friends are here. They are so angry, confused. But I can protect you. I am not me.
Now with the final voice lines about his friends being confused and angry, what if Glamrock Freddy's talking about his friends from Fazbear's Entertainment? other technicians that he surely knew of and was even friends with. Of course, they would be angry and confused as they were murdered by the Mimic and their spirits have not been put to rest. This could also mean that the technicians would actually reunite with the Mimic years later. Now, this can be a complete theory on its own, but saying that Burntrap is actually the Mimic, it makes sense why the Blob would target him and why he would want to keep him in the fire. Burntrap or the Mimic would murder them all years ago, and this would finally be a form of revenge for them. Now, I know this ending isn't canon, but it doesn't mean it couldn't happen or that the Blob wouldn't target Burntrap. When looking back at the beginning of the video where I said Security Breach was almost split into two stories, I do think Studio Studios or Scott Cawthon had an idea of the Blob being an entity from the past. This is why they chose animatronics that no longer exist, and not characters like Lefty or Molten Freddy, which were the current versions of characters. It looks like they knew this sinkhole area would be a part of something from the past, which is where these animatronics came from, but they just didn't know what that place exactly looked like. But with Secret of the Mimic, now we do. It's Mary's Costume Manor, a tragic tale of 7 technicians who were murdered by a rogue endoskeleton, leaving their spirits to possess the building and eventually Tangle. This could also explain why the Blob is attempting to escape in ruin and making all those tunnels. These 7 spirits have presumably been trapped in the sinkhole for decades, but now they would be able to escape where Cassie encounters them. Now, in terms of other theories, I made a poll on the channel a few days ago and the votes were actually pretty scattered around, so I do believe this could be possible, but for me the biggest issue is moving on. Although the past games and lore were heavily influenced into these newer games, I still don't think the Blob is possessed by any of those souls or agony. I think that the point of FNAF 6 was to show that they were finally put to rest, besides Golden Freddy and possibly William Afton of course, especially now with the release of Secret of the Mimic, where it's been made clear that the focus has shifted to new characters, new animatronics, and new tragedies. In terms of the Blob being possessed by souls in the Pizzaplex, like the missing children or Pizzaplex workers we learn about in the books, it could honestly go either way. But I still lean towards the technicians because for one, the books might not even be canon anymore, and we haven't really seen any focus on these new missing children. Besides the newspaper and one of the endings, the focus has been on other topics and characters like the Blob. And in general, it seems like we can use Secret of the Mimic to solve mysteries that were left unanswered and just confusing. Not only with the Blob, but other topics like William Afton, the FNAF Warehouse, and Fall Fest all finally have answers. But of course, I want to emphasize this video is just a theory. By no means is anything confirmed or should anything be taken as canon, but I feel very confident in this answer and I feel it's a way we can solve the Blob. So with all that said, I hope you all enjoyed this video and thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories you may have on the Blob. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and I really do appreciate all the support on the channel.